Kevin Yuan is an elite level powerlifter, personal trainer, strength coach, and educator. Kev specialises in strength development, human movement, muscle building, and fat loss. Kevin's fitness journey started in 2007, where he was introduced to weightlifting by his brother. At this point in his life, it was just a means to lose weight, but later developed into an obsession with strength training. This led him to compete in his first powerlifting competition in 2012 at the age of 18, where he took out 3 national records. The following year in 2013, Kevin started studying a bachelor degree in exercise and sports science. Whilst commencing a career as a personal trainer, he continued competing in the sport of powerlifting in multiple state, national, and world title competitions from 2014 to the present, as well as being invited to some of the highest level powerlifting competitions in Australia. Kevin has broken multiple records and holds the Australian under 100 kilogram 3-lift bench press record. In 2016, he also tried his hand at competitive bodybuilding in shows such as the Arnold Classic Australia and IFBB New South Wales and national titles. All right, welcome to the podcast, Kev.
Good to be here,
buddy. Yeah, it's been a while since we last chatted, as I said. So I think the last time that I saw you in person was back when you were part of the Alpha One Labs crew with Daniel Crimmy and Ari.
That would have been what, 2016, 2017?
Yeah, I think 2017, 2018, I think around Christmas time, they had that barbecue on the water. Yeah, it's been a long time since then. You've obviously grown with your own coaching business and been a part of Australian Strength Coach as well, and some of the work you've done there with those guys. So it'll be interesting to unpack some of the key learnings you've adopted through some of your mentors and how you're applying that these days with your clientele, but also in your own competitive powerlifting career.
Yeah.
But I also understand, and I think I remember some of these images coming up on social media at times, but you also competed in the IFBB at some point in men's physique.
Yeah, it was back in 2016. I got a bit sick of powerlifting just because I got a bit bored. I needed to find a new coach, and I decided, James Kant at the time approached me we had mutual friends. And pretty much he said, hey, look, I'll coach you for free. I kind of want to see how your physique molds from powerlifting to physique. And obviously it was a bit of a business transaction where he can promote me, how I transform my body from powerlifting to physique. So we did 3 comps in 2016.
And so I understand James does some powerlifting coaching as well. So he's got a background in powerlifting. It's quite common now, a lot of bodybuilders to have a hybrid kind of strength hypertrophy style of programming. Are you seeing more and more bodybuilders coming into competitive powerlifting now?
I definitely do, just because one, it's a very similar space. The prep's going to be different, but at the end of the day, we're still in the gym. We're enjoying what we're doing. So I guess some bodybuilders in the off season, there's one client I do have. She's called Caitlin. She does, I think, AMB. So she's going to compete next year in, I think, Perth. There's a nationals in Perth. So she's going to do that. So she's stopping powerlifting for the moment. And then once she finishes bodybuilding, she's going to go into a comp prep for the end of the next year. Yeah. So it's quite common.
You hear a lot of the misconceptions around, and I've always thought it's quite funny, but, people who often have quite blocky hips or thick lower back and glutes and, don't deadlift too much from the floor because you're going to get a thick waist, and how that does not, I can see you smiling and laugh. I want to maybe, for some of the listeners, just to maybe debunk some of those myths and talk about maybe why doing those 3 primary compound lifts, the bench, squat, and deadlift, form such a important building block for people to build out their frame, even in the sport of bodybuilding,
I think one thing that has really resonated with me when working under Sebastian, so Australian Strength Coach, is that if you learn how to master the squat, you pretty much know how to master every other lower body lift. Obviously, you have to learn to brace. You need to learn how to control your balance and feet position. But at the same time, you also need to learn how to properly move. Like the squat is something that you have to really get right to do really well. Otherwise, if you go on a leg press, it's a predetermined, what do you call it, bar path or motion. With a squat, you have to maintain your body, your upper body. You have to hip hinge correctly. You have to have correct knee extension, but everything has to be balanced. So being able to learn that, you also get movement patterns. You also get, you learn how to control your muscles and pretty much everything under the umbrella.
I guess whether you're doing a pendulum squat, a hack squat, whatever squat you're doing, it's a consistent movement pattern, and getting that fundamental technique down pat is obviously going to be really important to transition even into other accessory movements you're doing outside of those big three lifts. Now, I understand you've had some injuries and some competitions that you've competed in this year. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have done the Western Sydney Open this year, and I think you won that.
Yeah.
And you also did the 0W Pro, which you came second in. Now, I understand you had some injuries, and one of those meant that you couldn't partake in the deadlift and the squat, so you were only doing the bench pressing.
Yeah.
Where are you kind of at in your own competitive career at the moment, and how far are you off your PRs that you've set in the past?
So with the Western Sydney one, it was pretty much a qualifier for the Zero Pro.
Yeah.
So Zero Pro, you needed to meet a certain formula. So all we wanted to do, let me go from the start.
Yeah.
So earlier this year, I switched coaches. My new coach is now Matt Bartholomew, he's been in the industry for a while. I just needed a bit of a new look and pretty much a new someone to guide me a bit more and put more time into my, I guess, powerlifting career. So given the time frame, the Western Sydney was the last comp we could do to qualify for Zero Pro. Obviously, we came first there, but we'll probably add about 80%. Now, let's cut to Zero Pro. A week before, I ended up tearing my quad and adductor, which is why I couldn't squat and deadlift. Now, in terms of old PRs, I did bench only at the Zero Pro. I got 222.5 kilos, weighing 98 kilos. So at that body weight, that is an equal PR to what I've done the most. And obviously, I couldn't really squat or deadlift. Otherwise, we were aiming for 275 in sleeves in squat and probably a 300 to 310 deadlift. Those would have been PRs.
Online, it says your PRs are 265 kilo for a raw squat, and then 305 kilo wrapped.
Yep.
230 kilo bench press, 300 kilo deadlift. So is that roughly similar body weight that you hit those?
That was at 110.
Well, okay.
So the deadlift and the bench is at 110, and the wrap squat is at 110 as well. So I've dropped down I've dropped 10 kilos.
Yeah. So relatively speaking, that 220, I think you said, would have been competitive with one of your best lifts.
Yeah, so I matched my best lift in the under hundreds.
Okay.
So the 222.5, which I got about 5 years ago, but it was a grind.
Yep.
I did it a lot easier this time. So I've had also change in sport over the last 5 years. So I went into jiu-jitsu, and then I went into boxing, and then back into powerlifting.
Oh, wow. What have you learned about, transitioning between those sports? Has it taught you anything about the way your body moves and maybe some of the, I guess, say, inefficiencies or movement patterns that maybe you need to prioritize to make sure your body's functioning better as a whole?
So I definitely learned that different sports require different skill sets. And just because you're strong doesn't mean you're actually going to do well, even if it is a contact sport. So skill takes precedent over actual strength. Also, the different body requirements, such as rotation. We don't do a lot of we do single plane motion movements in powerlifting. It's just one plane. You stand in one spot, you bench in one spot, and you deadlift in one spot. What is required from jiu-jitsu and boxing is change in direction, a lot of torso movement. So stuff that I've never trained in. So it was quite a big surprise when moving on to that sort of sport. Sorry, someone was just at the door.
Sorry.
So fuck, lost my train of thought.
So what have you, I guess, got coming from coming to jiu-jitsu from your powerlifting, and you said you had to develop a lot more rotational strength and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Has this changed the way you periodize your training now? Have you started to incorporate more accessories like Russian twists or anything, or cable rotation, pull-off press, like anti-rotation exercises?
So Matt does all my programming.
Yep.
And he's quite simple with stuff. Not in a bad way, but only do what you need, right? So to be the best that you can in a certain sport, do what you need. You don't have to do all this fluff work. So in regards to now, if I had a weakness in rotational and it was affecting my lifts, then we would put it in. Otherwise, if it doesn't actually affect it, because he's all about, hey, you want to be good at powerlifting, pretty much beeline the whole way, right? Don't go outwards. Don't focus on anything else. If this is your actual goal to be the best, then you need to do everything specifically to powerlifting. And in this case, we don't need rotational, nor is my rotational weak for powerlifting. So therefore, we don't actually need to put it in. It's just fluff work at that point.
It's an interesting point about the specificity of strength. Like, if you're repeatedly training the same movement patterns and you get really strong at them, you know, you look at some rugby league players. I think some people have mentioned like James Tedesco. He's the most unassuming fullback to have quite a substantial amount of strength when it comes to like grappling and wrestling around the try line. But, you know, you look at someone like yourself who's like very built, obviously very, very powerful in those big three lifts. But it's interesting how, unless your specificity of training kind of aligns with what's required in the demands of your sport, you know, it's not a simple conversion, right? Like going across from playing rugby straight into powerlifting and being strong, like you still got to develop those movement patterns. We spoke to Andrew Chappell on the podcast. He's a WMBF professional natural bodybuilder. And he has a very similar training style, that hybrid technique between training strength and muscle hypertrophy. And he's done a lot of powerlifting in his time as well. One of the things that we just spoke about was, are you seeing more bodybuilders coming across from bodybuilding into powerlifting? What would be your advice for bodybuilders who are coming into powerlifting as to which competitions to enter as a novice, and maybe some common downfalls you see with new novices entering the sport?
If you're a seasoned bodybuilder and you actually have a lot of muscle, you have a lot of potential to lift a lot of weight. So when it comes to powerlifting, where this strength comes from is the skill of executing the movement. You can have all the strength that you want, but at the end of the day, if your bar path is off, if your balance is off, guess what? A guy that probably is, let's say, 30% weaker than you, but 50% more efficient, is actually going to lift more than you. So if a bodybuilder were to go into powerlifting, the best way is to learn the techniques first. Obviously, get yourself a seasoned coach that understands functional anatomy, and definitely do novice comps. Novice comps is there. There's the rules are a bit more lax for people to get the motivation to go into it. Start off novice comps, get a feel for competition, because there's a big difference between doing things in the gym and doing things in front of a crowd. A seasoned bodybuilder might be used to the crowd, but you still want to get practice in, right? Stay in your lane until you can move into the next one. And in terms of like where they should go, there's different federations. So there's obviously tested and untested. If you're tested and natural, you obviously go into your tested division. And then if you want to be like, if you're untested, which is they don't do any testing, just like IFBB doesn't, then you go into those.
So in terms of considerations like the crowd, how does that affect you? Obviously, there's a lot more adrenaline involved, but have you found in practice potentially your motivation to crack a new PR or hit a new weight on a lift exceed sometimes your ability to prioritize your safety in that context? Is that something you see? What kind of considerations need to be taken into account?
So obviously there's different people that do powerlifting. For me, I'm a bit more of a logical thinker, and hence why I also have a coach as well to give me my numbers for me. I don't go outside of those numbers, even if I do want to, and even if it was an emotional decision. So I prioritize logic over emotions. But there are a lot of people that, they get into the vibe of the crowd. It's like, yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that. Sometimes they overshoot, sometimes they're successful. But in terms of me, I'll always be a bit more logical. And it's how I deal with my clients as well. I'll give them certain numbers. And if they're like, hey, I want to do more, it's a non-negotiable.
Mhm. So we were talking a bit about Australian Strength Coach and maybe some of the learnings you got from Sebastian. How long has it been since you actually left Australian Strength Coach to start your own personal business, Dynasty
Yeah.
Performance?
So I think it's been about 8 months now. I've always run Dynasty for years. So I've been a PT at Anytime Fitness for about 7 years now, right? And within the first 6 months, I sought out Sebastian for mentorship and help. And then within 6 months of ever starting PT, I joined the team. Obviously, previously from then, I was already a world record powerlifter, and he asked me to join the team.
And so joining the team there, what kind of learnings did you pick up, not just in terms of your performance, but also in terms of coaching and running a business?
So I probably saw him about 4 times a week. So that was our training days, right? So throughout then, watching how he presented himself, how he spoke, how he dealt with certain situations, it kind of resonated with me. And obviously you kind of want to imitate it. So just being a certain image that you eventually want to be or grow into. Let me think. He's definitely shaped who I am as a person, and I wouldn't be in this position without him. So obviously, as a young up and coming PT, I learned to kind of copy everything he did. Some people might think that's a bad thing, but to me, I was copying one of my idols. Like what I mentioned before, how he spoke, he was articulate. Also how he dealt with situations. I take it on to, my clients and my leads as well. And just how he did business, just like planting seeds, not rushing into like certain decisions, and just being patient with what you have until opportunities came to you. And then you take opportunities as soon as they come.
So dialing in on, I guess, the foundational cues around the big three lifts. So I've obviously watched a lot of the videos that Sebastian posts online, whether it be deadlifting and screwing your feet into the ground, kind of pushing the ground away as you pull back, driving through your heels, taking the slack out of the bar, those kind of things. If you had a person listening now that really wants to nail their deadlift, and then that goes for bench and squats as well, what are those key movement cues that you teach when it comes to each of those lifts?
So when it comes to the deadlift, you want leg drive and you want to take the slack out of the bar. A lot of people in the gym, they think that power is everything. So what they do is they grab the bar, they try and yank it with the back as much as possible, when in reality, being patient in the setup is what's going to get you a good deadlift. So my cues when it comes to deadlifting is, first, find your foot position. When you stand in front of the bar and you look down, you want the bar to be over the middle of your foot. And then from there, what I like to do and what I like to tell my clients, do a few leg pumps. What this means is that you're bending at the knee. Every time you bend at the knee, you need to feel your whole foot drive into the floor, right? So that's a bit of a proprioception training. Once you feel that, don't let that go. Grab the bar, take about 50% of the slack out, and then use your hips to get into position before you drive off the feet again. So there's no one or two or three cues that it's going to be universal. I think feeling like leg drive and taking the slack out and then letting your body do whatever it needs to do is important.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we were talking about before with specificity of strength and repetition, doing the same movement pattern over and over again. I guess one of the benefits of, say, the deadlift and having a process you do when you step up the lift is when you transfer that to competition, you don't get overawed by the crowd or the adrenaline and that kind of thing. So what about squat now when it comes to back squat?
It depends if it's a high bar or a low bar.
Let's go through both.
Okay. With a high bar, if you're aiming to look at, quad development, then you want to be a bit more upright. You want more knee extension, which means the knee goes a bit more over the toe. But you'll get that uprightness naturally as you put the bar higher where your traps are. So not where your neck is and not where your rear delt is, but in the middle of where the trap is, right? So the cues for that, and it's very similar to low bar as well, but I focus a lot on foot pressure. If you can push your whole foot into the floor and actually flatten it as you come down and as you come up, what your body is going to do is it's going to move where it feels the safest and where it feels the most efficient, right? So you'll have a lot of different cues that you'll hear, shoulders back and down, squeezing your shoulder blades together. That's a very common one. And it's actually originated probably from Olympic powerlifting. I'm not going to say it's 100% originated because people have their own views, but in my eyes, because if you look at the best squatters or the most perfect squatters, you're going to think of an Olympic weightlifter, right? And the cues that they use is shoulders back and down, slightly extend the chest, and keeping a very nice position.
You hear a lot of people talking about how taller individuals with longer femurs are more suited to different types of squatting, say like a low bar squat, or people who are more hip dominant rather than, quadricep focused squatting. Is this something that you sort of educate your clientele on, which might be the most appropriate for them in competition? And I guess working around that, accessories to maybe strengthen up where they have weaknesses?
Yeah. So for me, I don't get a measuring tape and go, hey, this is going to be longer, so therefore you need to do this. Yep. What I get them to do is, again, let's say we're going to go through a low bar squat. You're going to focus on your foot pressure. You're going to focus on your brace, which is ribs down. And then I'm going to get you to squat while focusing only on balancing as you come down and as you come up. How they do it is going to tell me a lot about where their position should be. So if they have long femurs, naturally the hips are going to shoot back just a bit more for them to hit depth. As the hip shoots back, the torso will follow, which means the torso has to be just slightly more forward than usual, right? So in that case, if they try and be as upright as possible, they'll either not be able to hit depth, or they're not going to be in a good position because their hips are trying to shoot back. They're trying to stay upright. They're probably going to go on their heels, which puts them out of an efficient bar path. So
Yeah.
I'll adjust what they already have, going off by no cues at all.
So someone who's got a longer femur and is more hip dominant, when they do like a low bar back squat, I was going to engage a lot more of their like erector spinae as well, their lower back extensors.
Yep.
So do you find when you're periodizing training for your clientele, is there more of a focus around like hip hinge movements for those that do low bar back squat in competition and do have longer femur lengths? Or is it the opposite where you try to get them doing more of that low bar back squatting, and a lot of these accessories are trying to strengthen up other areas of the body?
So when it comes to programming, let's say we're going to program for the squat.
Yep.
So a person with longer femurs, regardless, they'll have more hip hinge. Therefore, what we want to do is we want to work on a bit more knee extension.
Okay. Yep.
So we want to work on the weaknesses rather than reinforce, I guess, their strongest or natural movement pattern. So we want a balanced body rather than just making whatever they're doing stronger. So I think that sets the base for it, because most people that are going to be lifting, they're not going to be at the top percentile anyways. So you build the base. Once that base is built, then you start refining just a bit more depending on what they need.
Sure. Now we transition into the bench press. I've seen you create some really good reels on Instagram, and some of your social media content is really informative. One of the reels I looked at before we came on the podcast was about the having your heels off the ground when you're doing a bench press. So when you've got that bench arc, I know it's probably been a lot more popularized in even those individuals that are competing in bodybuilding now and getting into kind of like power building techniques or styles of training. What are some of the biggest issues you see with bench arc and bench press technique? Because I feel like this is one of the areas where there's probably a lot more room for error, would you say, with getting that? Because there's so many different moving parts. You're looking at your feet positioning, your knees, your glute drive, but also where your shoulders are positioned, where the bar path is when you unrack. So I guess when we break down the bench press, what are the key cues there, and what things do you see most commonly done incorrectly in new lifters?
So one of the things I see incorrectly is just the setup itself. So I'm going to break down the setup, and this is just how my mind thinks. I'm very nitpicky with everything. So when it comes to the setup, people take that heels up approach a bit too much. The reason why you do a heels up is for more hip extension, which will then allow you to create a bigger arch, which will then reduce your range of motion. Now, it doesn't matter how big of an arch you create. If there's no stability with your feet, you're pretty much putting your performance down. So a lot of people will tend to just create a big arch for the sake of it without understanding pretty much every other point. So when it comes to heels, I think anywhere between 0 to 45 degrees from the floor is going to be the most efficient way, right?
Sure.
The reason why I say 0 degrees, which is on the floor, is because some federations will require you to actually go flat feet. So it's actually illegal, or you'll get red lights, which means no lift if you have your heels off the floor. So kind of have to address that too.
So would you say in the long term there, Kev, that working on ankle dorsiflexion outside of your training would be more important in the long term to make sure that you can get a bigger bench arc, but also have that stability when you're in position?
I think if you lack dorsiflexion, then yes, you should be training it long term. However, if you don't have the problem, then like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, you don't really need to address it as of yet. Otherwise, you're just picking at fruit for no reason. One quote I like to use is pick the lowest hanging fruit,
Sure.
right? So the things that are already presented to you, you make the change.
So in the moment there, that's what you can do. So sort of slide your feet down till you get to a point where you get that stability and you can get that leg drive. So moving up the chain. So in terms of glute drive, any cues there with like locking down your hips onto the bench?
So this is going to be an interesting one because the hip position or hips coming up, which is something you see a lot from people, is actually going to be a lack of leg drive, right? So let's say you use your legs, heels back and down towards the floor, hips go up, you unrack the weight. You then lower the hip so it touches the bench. As you come down with the bar, you'll see a lot of people's heels come up, which means they're not maintaining that leg drive. Once it hits the chest, what you'll see is hips drive down again, bar comes up. Generally, this loss in tension, because you've lost tension through your legs and then your hips, your butt will come up and then it'll come back down. So the trick to that is constant leg drive from the very beginning. Let's say from the time you unrack the weight.
All right. So then we move up the chain again to unracking the weight. Obviously, you want to retract your shoulder blades, lock them down. In terms of the bar path, is there any key cues there in terms of like say bending the bar or anything to help people with their whether it be locking down their scapula and getting it in a good solid position to press from?
Yeah. So when it comes to locking the upper body down, I think the key, and I'm gonna bring this back every time, is gonna be your leg drive. So when you see me bench, you'll see my hips are up. I'm actually driving my upper body. Let's say this is my upper body down into the bench. So hips are up, I'm driving it down. I've unracked the weight. Then I drop the hip down like this. It's already secured. I don't need to do anything else I don't need to squeeze my shoulder blades back any further. It's just set. That's why it's called a setup. You set your upper body up and your lower body up. Well, you set everything up, right? So the key for me and something that I just teach everyone is put the pressure on the outside of the palm, right? So if you put the pressure on the outside of the palm and you balance on the way down, your body is actually going to move your elbows however it needs to. If you squeeze the bar or bend the bar like this, or even spread the bar apart, you see what it does to my elbow? You might overdo it with the internal rotation, or you might overdo it with the external rotation. Your body is actually quite a smart, like mechanically quite smart. It's not going to put ourselves in danger. So therefore, if you only focus on one point, and let's say here, if you come down and come up, the body will move the elbow however it needs.
In terms of the grip as well, so obviously we can go into a lot of detail about hook grip, whatever grip you're using for deadlift, bench pressing. A lot of the time you see when people are starting out, the bar will almost roll back towards their fingers and they'll hold it with quite a lot of flexion in their wrist. So would you, I guess, educate individuals to make sure that the bar is over the top of their wrist?
Yeah,
as opposed to sliding back. That's probably one of those low-hanging fruits when it comes to grip, but
100%.
yeah.
One cue I like to give one exercise I like to give new people that join the team that don't know how to grip the bar properly, and you can try this yourself, is next time you warm up on a empty barbell, try taking your fingers off.
Okay.
Right? So let's say you have the bar here.
Mm-hmm.
Take your fingers off and bench. what are you going to naturally try and do?
You're going to try and keep the bar in position. You don't want it to roll back, obviously, because of falling.
Exactly. So if your fingers are open and the bar is here, what do you think is going to happen?
It's going to roll back to the center because you got more stability there.
Exactly. So you're going to roll back to the center. So by having an open palm as you bench, your body's the barbell will tell you where the right position is. Otherwise, you're going to cop a barbell to the face.
To the face, yeah.
So usually it's about here, right? So from a side profile, it's going to be right over the wrist joint.
Okay.
If you have it over here, that increases the moment arm. And then that also increases the pressure on the wrist.
A lot more stress on the wrist. Yep.
Yeah. So I made the change to my wrist position back in 2017, 2018. I used to bench here.
Okay.
And I used to bench 200 kilos here until my wrist popped.
Fuck.
So I tore all my ligaments in my left wrist, and it was not fun. So I remember I tried to supinate my hand, and in my head it was I felt it go all the way here. But guess what? I was looking down at my wrist, and that's all I could do. Every ligament here just popped.
So, see, this is one of the things, Kev, that I actually want to talk to you about with your injuries. Again, similar to what we just talked about with regard to technical cues, you created some really good content around, bench press technique, whatever it may be, deadlift, squat. But in terms of relatable videos for people to rehab injuries, or whether they're office workers or, on the tools, 9 to 5. But when it comes to powerlifting, I imagine it's a lot different to, say, a bodybuilder, right? Where when they're recovering from injury, pretty much just change exercises, reduce the load to a manageable, tolerable level of pain until their pain tolerance or threshold improves. With powerlifting, because in competition too, it's based around those three key movements. And I guess you have a bit of an association of when you sustain that injury at a given weight. There is that psychological component, which I imagine would be hard to overcome. Say you've injured all the flexors in your wrist at 220 bench pressing. When you do step up in competition to bench again at that weight, I imagine a lot of the thoughts going through your head are, last time I did this, I tore all those ligaments in my hand. Is that something that you've had to overcome psychologically with the number of different injuries you've had?
Funny you should say that. I had a bit of a mental block last week with squats.
Right.
So last prep for Zero Pro, I tore my adductor doing 255. So I didn't even feel it. So as I was coming down, you know how you have indicators where like something's tight, something's not feeling right.
Yeah.
Every box was not ticked, which means that I was going into the weight so confidently. I had a small injury with my quad, and then that's what caused it. Like my quad was weak, therefore my adductor tried to take it, took too much weight, ended up tearing. So I did that maybe 6 weeks ago now, and I've rehabbed it well. I tried to squat 185, and as I was coming down with 185, which is like almost 100 kilos less than my best, right? So as I was coming down with 185, I kept on having flashbacks of me tearing my adductor. So I kept on tilting to one side, and I kept on driving my knee out so my adductor wasn't being used. But I was doing that subconsciously. And in my head, I did 5 reps, but each rep I was telling myself, use your adductor, use your adductor. But my body just froze on me. And there was nothing I can think or say or do that prevented my my body from listening, or got my body to listen.
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting you say that. It's definitely like it's a mental thing that you kind of have to get used to, but you have to go through the appropriate rehab and what do you call it, post recovery protocol to get over that, because even now I'll have mental blocks and something I have to learn not to do.
Yeah. So two of those key principles which you've cited in your social media channels is getting blood flow back into the injured site as much as possible, and also strengthening the surrounding muscles, or those muscles that, stabilize the injured area. So for instance, obviously the glutes, quadriceps, hamstrings are big prime movers, but there's a lot of little other muscle groups around those that which are quite important for different movements, whether it be hip adduction, abduction, internal, external rotation, and all those kind of movement patterns.
Yeah. So let's say you injure, or I injured my quad or adductor, right? If I sat on my ass and just did nothing and let it recover, it'll take a few weeks, if not months, for me to get back into full strength. And when I do get back into the movement, once I'm recovered, guess what? I'm going to be very weak. I'm going to be very weak because one, I haven't done the lift in a while, and my movement literacy is going to be bad. And number two, because I haven't done anything or about the surrounding muscle, what your body does is it wastes away if it doesn't need it, right? Strength goes down quite quickly, but it also comes back up quite quickly. If I'm going to neglect pretty much my glutes, my hamstrings, my what do you call it, my everything, all my muscles,
Yeah.
just because I've injured one, everything's going to go down, right? So the rehab protocol is to one, get blood into it, and number two, strengthen the surrounding muscles so that when you get back into the lift, you're not going to be as weak as if you did nothing.
So you get that muscle atrophy, right? Where all the muscle wasting from the time off. So that's one of the big considerations around pain management, isn't it? It's basically to reduce the intensity or the load, and continue to get blood flow in there, but at a reduced, I guess, load on the bar or whatever it may be, to ensure that you're not going to cause any flare-ups or re-aggravation of the injured area. Now, your mentor, Andrew Locke, I think he cited the McGill Big Three, which you've done a little video on that did quite well, went viral on Instagram. So the McGill Big Three, you say that's a tool that can be utilized for a lot of people that are early risers and they've obviously been in bed for 6 to 8 hours, or those that have been sitting down at a desk job 9 to 5. So I guess with regards to that technique, what are some of the things that you might like to advise the listeners on, in terms of why it's such a useful tool for warm up pre-activation?
So there were pretty much 50-50 responses on that one. So half of it was good, half of it was bad, saying, hey, you don't actually need it, right?
I saw a few people just loading up, hey, like writing abusive comments and stuff. It's like, well, Kev's not trying to hurt or injure anyone. He's just trying to help provide information.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people that, when you say things, it gets into their feelings because it doesn't actually coincide with what they think,
Yeah.
right? Or it's like, show me some scientific papers, like all that bull, right? So the whole point, the takeaway which I got from the McGill Big Three is you're gonna pick 3 exercises which allows you to engage with your core. So it's less about the exercises itself.
About the principle.
Yeah, it's more about the principle and how you do it, right? Yeah. So if you're going to just do a plank or a bird dog and you're just going to do the movement itself, guess what? It's a bad exercise. Sorry, I was going to swear.
No, you can swear. Go for your life.
Well, it's a shit exercise, right?
Yeah.
But if you do it with intent, if you focus on your breathing,
Yep.
and then you take it onto your next session, it's a good exercise.
Cool.
Because if you go straight into the squat and you're a beginner, or you're someone who's not used to the gym and you don't know how to brace, you're probably going to get injured if you're putting a heavy enough weight. Now, if you do the McGill Big Three, which is based on the core and core positioning, and then you take it onto the squat, you're going to be braced, you're going to be much safer, and you're going to lift better. right? So the whole thing about the McGill Big Three for me is you take on the things that you're going to do into your actual session, which is bracing and holding position. So people were getting into their feelings saying, hey, those three exercises are useless. Well, guess what? Pick three other exercises which will allow you to put yourself in a brace position with your core, call it whatever you want, and run with it.
So whether you do like a dead bug or curl up or pull off press or whatever it may be, anything that kind of activates your core is going to be a good foundation to commence with some more compound lifting.
100%. Like if you feel it and it works for you, run with it. It doesn't have to be, McGill's specific three exercises. You can pick three of your own and it's going to work.
Yeah. So I saw there was some exercises though where you're in a prone position and it looked like more glute activation. So is there any benefit in maybe out of those three movements that you're using as pre-activation, targeting different areas of the body? So maybe there's more of a core focus, glute activation or, abduction, whether it be like a clam, a seated clam with bands around your ankles or anything of that nature. Would you advise, to focus your warm-ups around those different areas or just keep it more of a, more well-rounded movement pattern? So anyway, we'll chop that out. That's a bit of a
So
like a compound, a warm-up that targets different components of the body. So say you do like a pull-off press, that's core, shoulders. If you get into slight knee flexion, you can use that'll be a little bit of the glutes as well will be engaged. So what kind of movement patterns would you suggest if people said, what three should I utilize if it's not the McGill Big Three?
So the biggest one is going to be your core. If you're going to do big compound movements, if you're going to go jump straight on a machine, then I'd say it's pretty useless.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're going to do big compound movements where you need to hold torso position and you need to hold a proper brace, then start off with some core stuff, right? If you know that you lack internal rotation or you lack any sort of mobility within your joints, then move on to that. So for example, when I do my bench press, before I do anything, I work on my shoulder external rotation and my internal rotation, right? Because I'm quite limited, just either due to genetics or muscle mass or how I sleep. Whatever it is, I aim to tackle that. Now, if someone's hypermobile, and especially within the shoulders, would I tell them to do the exact same thing that I'm doing? Probably not. So I don't believe that there is a blanket or like a rule on what you need to do. It depends on what you need. Otherwise, like I said before, they're just fluff exercises, and that's where a lot of hate gets mentioned, right? Especially with something like the big three. Hey, I don't need the big three. I just have to jump on a bicycle. Cool. If that works for you, that works for you. But for a lot of people, they don't know how to brace. Therefore, the McGill Big Three actually works. If someone had, hip extension problems, then you'd work on, let's say, do a glute bridge, do some banded crab walks, right? So it all depends on what you actually need. And this is why coaching is so important. You have to tailor towards the clientele.
And I think one of the really important points there is making sure it's dynamic in nature too. Obviously, you would understand all of the research around, static stretching before strength training obviously reduces your strength during the session. So a lot of those movements you want to do are dynamic in nature. So moving through the planes of movement that you intend to utilize during your session. When it comes to your injury that you sustained bench pressing, have you had any other really hairy instances? I imagine a lot more severe if you're under a bar back squatting anywhere between 260 to 300 kilograms. What's been the most frightening kind of experience for you being under a heavy bar or deadlifting?
This was during lockdown. So I pretty much blew both my knees squatting. and it was more of an accident than anything else. So I was rap squatting. It was about 260 kilos. Obviously, during lockdown, during COVID lockdown, everyone like we didn't really have many places to train. So I was training outside, right? It was a bit raining as well. So 260 kilo on my bar, knee wraps on. So that means obviously everything's stiffened up. I came down, came up, and I think I failed one of my reps, right? Because there was a bit of a balance issue. The floor wasn't even straight.
Wow.
Like lockdown.
Lockdown, yeah,
I just wanted
improvisation.
to train, right? So I came down and I went to roll the bar off my back. It ended up getting caught on my belt. So
Oh,
my torso went this way, my legs just shot forward, and my feet were still planted.
oh. And the bar rolled onto your belt and got stuck.
Yeah, so it rolled onto my back, onto my belt. It shot me backwards, knees came forward, and then both my I think the popliteals, the back of my knees just popped. Um, I couldn't really walk for about 2 weeks. And at that point, I was just like, you know how an old man walks with like one of those mobility canes?
Ability can
That's literally how I was walking. I couldn't
Asian granddad.
move. But that's probably my worst one. I've had a lot of tears. So I've had hamstring tears, I've had hip flexor tears, I've had like rotator tears. Something that my coach has told me is always go into a session expecting an injury.
Yeah,
Obviously, you don't want it to happen, but with the weights that we do, there is a higher chance of doing it. So
sure.
you can't ever be, hey, I'm going to be efficient that nothing's ever going to happen. There is a risk to it.
I feel like there's a lot of people that come out of COVID with some form of story like that, whether it be, adapting to new, new surroundings, home gym, whatever it may be, but also, training and the connection you built with your training partner or whatever it may be. So what was the setup like for you during COVID, and how did, I guess, coaching and your clientele change? I imagine a lot of it would have been online anyway, so it wouldn't have changed too much, but I guess your own personal training and the setup you had.
So I'm very fortunate. I do have a factory. So I work at Anytime Fitness Belfield, but I also have a family what do you call it, construction and joinery business. So pretty much I took took a space. It was about 7 meters by 5 meters, and just put a lot of gym stuff in. Clientele can train if they wanted to. And then that's where I trained as well. So I did miss having like a good team around me. I had a few training partners, but at the end of the day, like, we are social creatures. We do like to be in a social environment. So when there was less people doing weights, that's when I moved on to jiu-jitsu, because most of my friends do some sort of combat sports. And that's when I kind of stopped powerlifting during COVID, mainly because we just didn't know if there was going to be any competitions on,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So my training went from powerlifting to jiu-jitsu and strength and conditioning.
It's been funny because like at that time I did a bit of like distance running when the gym, like I was obviously training in a gym space with what I had equipment wise, but I've interviewed some people on these podcasts now that have, been to prison and done a bodybuilding prep in prison. And it makes me feel like such a bitch now because I think about, during COVID, I was carrying on. I've only got bands or like 5 kilo bags of rice, dumbbells, like a barbell with limited weight to add to the bar. And then I hear about this Saladin Troel, who was in the United States and he spent 27 years in prison, and he literally came out of prison 2 weeks before he won his WMBF pro card,
Wow.
and he was doing posing practice in the windows, and the guards were bringing him food, and he was writing a plans by hand. So some crazy stories, but it makes me feel, yeah, like a bit of a bitch carrying on about the whole COVID period. But it's good to hear you had some interesting stories coming out of there, and like I imagine a lot of the listeners did too. But thanks for coming on the podcast today, Kevin. Thanks for giving up your time, and I appreciate a lot of your insights around different movement cues, but also rehabbing injury, and then some of the experiences you've had in your career, whether it be coaching or as an athlete yourself.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, mate. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Strength Connect podcast. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to rate the podcast or subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips from each episode. You can also follow us on all social media platforms using the handle @StrengthConnect.